Hello, awesome human. I'm so glad you dropped by. If it's your first time here, don't be shy. Subscribe and pass this video along to your friends, family, or that one cousin who watches everything. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so drop your location in the comments. I read them all. Let's get this show on the road. Greg didn't slam the door. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't even glance back at his half-eaten dinner. All he did was extend the envelope toward Jonah, calm hands, emotionless expression, and walk out like someone taking responsibility for damage they didn't cause. The silence that followed wasn't soft. It cut clean and deep, like a surgeon's blade. Jonah stared at the envelope as though it might detonate. Across the room, Denise refilled her wine glass, turning it slowly in her hand as if the motion was part of a well-practiced performance. Maybe it was. "You could have waited," Jonah muttered, his voice barely audible. "For what?" she replied, eyes still on her glass. "He's not your biological father, Jonah. You know that." Jonah didn't answer. He kept his eyes on the envelope, running his thumb along its edge like tracing the seam of an old wound. Outside, Greg's car started with a quiet rumble, reversing from the driveway with the same unshaken steadiness he always had. Even the time Greg rushed Jonah to the emergency room, blood soaking through his jersey, his forehead split wide, he hadn't flinched. He just acted. Always had. Inside the house, the air felt warped, too dense. Denise broke the silence. "You're not saying anything." "What do you want me to say?" Jonah mumbled. "That I get it? That I've grown up? That the charade's over?" There it was, charade. Like the years of birthday parties, scraped knees, and weekend movie marathons were some elaborate farce. As if Greg's presence, every single day of it, meant nothing because he didn't share Jonah's DNA. If you've ever been that man, the one who stays when others don't, you know the kind of wound that leaves. It isn't just abandonment, it's erasure, not just the loss of love, but the rewriting of your very place in the story. Quick note. Most people listening haven't subscribed. If that's you, hitting that button helps us keep sharing the stories others are too afraid to tell. And this one? It digs deep before it heals. Greg didn't end up in a hotel that night. He didn't crash at a buddy's place. Instead, he drove to a small unit above a Thai restaurant on Grove Street. One he'd been quietly renting for weeks, just in case. That speaks volumes. He didn't erupt. He prepared. He'd seen the signs. Denise's newfound interest in ancestry kits, her sudden reconnections with old friends, the way she started saying his wins, not our sons. And yet Greg never called her out. He waited. That night, in the narrow room, he sat on the single bed and looked at the photograph on the nightstand. The one Denise hadn't noticed was gone. Jonah's 6th birthday. Icing smeared on his cheeks. Greg in the background, laughing. No color filters, no staged outfits. Just a kind of love that isn't passed down. It's built. He didn't cry. Wasn't his way. Instead, he pulled a fireproof box from under the bed and flipped through what was inside. Receipts, snapshots, drawings in crayon, a crooked Father's Day card that read, "To Dad, you are the best." The letters were uneven, some backward. At the bottom, a document. Official, sealed. Adoption papers, signed when Jonah was 2. Final. Legal. Greg had never mentioned them. He hadn't thought it necessary. To him, love didn't require proof. It required presence. But now, with Denise trying to reduce his role to a footnote, that paper had become something else entirely. And he'd just handed it to Jonah. Back at home, Jonah sat motionless. The envelope sat across his legs like a weight he couldn't shift. Denise had gone upstairs, convinced she'd won, that the narrative had changed successfully. But Jonah didn't tear the envelope open. Not that night. He placed it gently on his desk, as if it were a relic. Then, wordlessly, he went to bed. No good night, no confrontation. That silence, it wasn't surrender. It was the beginning. Denise moved quickly, quicker than Greg had guessed. Within days, her social media had been curated into something entirely new. No outright jabs, just subtle captions beneath wine-glass selfies, words like new beginnings, found family, true love heart. There were snapshots of Jonah at dinner, Marcus barely visible in the background. A story of Jonah's certificate from 8th grade, so proud of this young man. But the revision wasn't sloppy. It was deliberate. She never named Greg, only insinuated. Messages crafted to say, solo parent. Did it all on her own. Around yoga mats and brunch tables, the story became simple. Greg had been distant, detached, just a figure who showed up, not someone who parented. Denise, of course, carried the load. Greg began to hear the rumors secondhand. A co-worker's wife who'd chatted with Denise at a benefit casually mentioned how hard the breakup had been and how Jonah was finally discovering where he came from. Another friend forwarded a post from a parenting forum where Denise asked how to support her son as he reconnects with his biological roots after enduring a toxic co-parenting dynamic. Toxic. Greg didn't respond. Not online. Not in private messages. Not even when his sister called, voice low with worry, asking, "I'm sorry about what Denise is saying. Is Jonah all right?" He answered, he will be. Because here's what Denise didn't realize. Greg had figured out long ago, trying to outshout someone addicted to rewriting history is a losing battle, especially when they've made themselves the hero. So, he let her spin it, for now. Meanwhile, the apartment began to feel lived in. Sparse, sure, but not cold. A few plants, a telescope near the window, a corkboard with old game stubs pinned up, but only one photo sat framed. That birthday one. He never swapped it out. As for Jonah, he remained quiet. He didn't open the envelope, but he also didn't parrot Denise's version. He didn't block Greg, didn't delete old messages. The only thing Greg received from him that week? 2 words. You okay? Greg wrote back, always. Nothing more. No pleading, no explanations. Because Greg knew how these things moved. He knew that teenage loyalty doesn't bend easily, especially under manipulation. And DNA? It can't outlast consistency. Greg understood that time plants seeds, and Denise's biggest mistake? Believing Jonah had forgotten. But kids don't forget. They remember who sat through freezing games and marked papers in the car under dim dome lights. They remember who was at every conference night, even uninvited, who lifted them from bed when the smoke alarm wailed at 2 a.m. They remember who stayed. And slowly, Denise's version started to unravel. She accidentally mentioned a dentist appointment Greg had scheduled. Another time, she blanked on the name of Jonah's 5th grade teacher. Jonah noticed. Greg had been the one who'd helped Jonah assemble the model of the solar system, the one where each planet orbited smoothly when you spun the base. At the time, Jonah hadn't given it much thought. Only later, piece by piece, did it sink in. The full weight of that understanding arrived quietly one Tuesday night, without warning. During dinner, Denise reclined in her chair, her tone deceptively light, masking something smug underneath. Your biological father, Marcus, he's been thinking about visiting. Maybe you two could reconnect. Jonah didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply asked, "What's his last name again?" The hesitation that followed stretched too long, unnatural. Jonah's eyes dropped to his plate, then back to hers. You sure he even remembers mine? Denise didn't respond. She only took a slow sip of wine and changed the subject. That night, when the house was quiet, Jonah sat alone in his room. He reached into the drawer of his desk and pulled out a sealed envelope. For a long moment he just stared at it, his thumb tracing the edges. He wasn't ready to read it. Not really. But he couldn't keep pretending he never would. Near midnight, he finally tore it open. No ceremony, no pause for breath, just the faint rip of paper under the yellow glow of his desk lamp. Through the wall, his mother's soft snores hummed like static in the background. Somehow, that ordinary sound made what he was doing feel safer. Inside was a letter, neatly folded into thirds. The handwriting was familiar. deliberate loops, steady ink. Greg's. The first line wasn't "Dear Jonah," it was, "You were always my son." Jonah blinked, then kept reading. There was no resentment in the words. No blame, no digs at Denise, just memories. "You were 2 the first time you called me Dad. We were in the grocery store. You pointed at cookies and said, 'Please, Dad.' I didn't answer right away because I was trying not to cry in the dairy aisle." The letter continued like that, fragments of life stitched together. Quiet moments most people forget. The night Jonah broke his arm on the trampoline and Greg, still in his work clothes, carried him barefoot to the car. The telescope they built together over 3 weekends, parts scattered across the living room like a small-scale space program. A receipt Greg saved, not for a refund, but as proof the moment had happened. Movie tickets from Interstellar with Greg's handwriting on the back. "Your mind is bigger than this universe." At the bottom of the envelope were several documents. One carried an official seal. Finalized adoption of minor child, Jonah Elliott Gaines. Adoptive parent, Gregory O'Connors. Date, August 4th, 2010. Jonah traced the raised notary stamp with his fingertips, almost expecting it to hum under his skin. It didn't need to. It was real. The letter ended simply. "You don't owe me anything. Not a name, not an explanation. But when you're ready to ask who you are, remember who kept showing up." Jonah didn't cry. He didn't move. He sat there until the words blurred and stopped being words, until they became something heavier, something he couldn't yet name. The next morning, Denise tapped on his door. "You're gonna be late." "I'm not going," Jonah answered, his back still to her. A beat. "You sick?" "Nope." "Then what's wrong?" "I'm thinking," he said. That was it. That night he skipped dinner. He ignored her texts the day after, and the day after that. Not out of spite, but because something inside him was shifting. In his head, he started rearranging the past. Who had cheered at his piano recital? Who taught him to tie a tie before 8th grade formal? Who sat with him before his first job interview? Who hadn't? Denise felt the silence like a weight. She tried jokes. She tried bribery. "Taco night? Found this hoodie you'd love. Marcus says he might come for your birthday." Jonah's response was always the same. "Cool." Then back to his laptop. But he wasn't on TikTok. He was scrolling through an old Google Drive folder called Science Projects. Photos Greg had uploaded years ago. Jonah in a bedsheet lab coat, the cardboard volcano they built together, grainy videos of baking soda rockets shooting off the porch. Greg's laugh echoed in the background of one clip, loud, unguarded. Denise had never saved moments like that. She was always busy. Greg hadn't been. He was there. He had always been there. Jonah didn't need to ask himself who his father was anymore. He just had to remember. The invitation to Denise's birthday looked less like a celebration and more like a press release. Gold foil lettering, a posed professional photo of Denise in a white pantsuit. Venue, the Glass House Atrium. Live band, sushi caterers, valet parking. It screamed, "Look at me. Look at what I've become." She blasted the digital invite everywhere, Instagram, Facebook, even LinkedIn, with the caption, "50 and flourishing, cherry blossoms, gratitude, and fresh starts." The accompanying photos showed Denise, Marcus, and Jonah together. They were carefully arranged, recent. Jonah's smile looked practiced in each one, like someone bracing for a dental x-ray. The real sting came 3 days before the party. At brunch, mimosa in hand, Denise asked casually, "You'll say a few words, right? Nothing major, just thank your real family." Jonah didn't look up from his phone. "What's that supposed to mean?" She waved a dismissive hand. "You know, the people who made you who you are." "Greg made me who I am," Jonah said evenly. Denise scoffed, sipping her drink. "Greg was just around. Marcus is your father." Jonah stared at her, expression unreadable, then gave the smallest, tightest smile. "Sure, I'll speak." And she believed him. That afternoon, Jonah rode his bike across town. No text, no warning. Just showed up at Greg's door, hoodie pulled low, breath fogging in the February cold. Greg opened the door, surprised but not shocked, like he'd been waiting for this moment, just not expecting it today. They ended up on the balcony, wrapped in worn blankets, watching cars crawl by below. Jonah didn't speak for a while. Finally, "You still keep those terrible frozen pizzas?" Greg smirked. "You still pick off the pepperoni?" Obviously. They ate quietly. Greg didn't ask why Jonah had come. He didn't push. After a couple slices, Jonah leaned back, eyes on the gray sky. "She wants me to give a speech," Jonah said. Greg raised an eyebrow. "At her party. Big fancy thing. Marcus will probably be there." Greg didn't react. "You gonna do it?" Jonah shrugged. "Thinking about it." Pause. "Would you care?" Greg thought for a moment. "No." Jonah nodded. "But," Greg added gently, "I'd want you to mean what you say. Not for me, not for her, not for anyone. Just because it's your choice who you want to be." Jonah studied him. "And if I screw it up?" Greg's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Then you fix it. That's what men do." They didn't hug. That wasn't how they worked. But at the door, Jonah paused. "You know when her party is?" Greg nodded. "Little Bird mentioned it." "You going?" "Nope." Jonah hesitated, then said softly, "Might be worth it." Greg flashed a quick grin. "I'll put it on the calendar." That same evening, Denise went through her RSVP list again, tweaking seating charts as if the fate of the party depended on it. Marcus sent word that his flight was booked. Denise, unwilling to risk bad lighting, hired a second photographer, just in case. Meanwhile, Jonah sat hunched at his desk, staring at a blank document titled Mom's Birthday Speech. He typed one line. "A dad is the person who shows up when it matters least for them, but most for you." He deleted it, typed it again, deleted it once more. Marcus had chosen the sort of cafe that looked like a gallery more than a place to eat. Floor-to-ceiling glass, baristas who treated espresso like a sacred ritual, $9 toast topped with foraged ingredients, and a server who asked, "Still or sparkling?" as if the answer revealed your soul. Marcus was already there when Jonah walked in, tanned, expensively dressed, smiling like charm alone could erase years of absence. "Jonah," he said warmly, standing up and leaning in for a hug. Jonah allowed it, but his arms stayed loose. Marcus motioned toward a chair. "You've shot up since I last saw you. Do you play basketball?" "Not really." "Man, you've got the build for sports. Maybe football?" "I like writing and physics." Marcus laughed like that was cute. "We've got a brainiac on our hands. Your mom wasn't kidding about you being smart." Jonah didn't respond. He picked up the menu. They ordered. Marcus went for something with truffle oil. Jonah picked the cheapest sandwich. Then Marcus started his performance. A polished story about his life, how he'd grown up, learned his lessons, deals closed, wealthy clients, weekends in Miami and Phoenix, Denver possibly on the horizon. He swiped through his phone, showing off a convertible, skyline views from balconies, and photos with women Jonah didn't ask about. "You know," Marcus said, voice dropping into a confidential tone, "your mom and we were just kids. I wasn't ready back then, but I do think about you. A lot." He reached into his wallet, pulling out a faded school photo of Jonah. 5th grade, maybe. Denise must have sent it back when she still hoped Marcus would care. Jonah leaned back in his chair. "Do you remember my 3rd grade play?" Marcus blinked. "Was that the one where you were the tree?" "Number I was Galileo." "Right, yeah, Galileo, that's great." Jonah's voice was even. "Then what was my favorite cereal?" Marcus gave an awkward chuckle. "I haven't had cereal in years." "Cinnamon Life," Jonah said. "It's still my favorite." Marcus shifted, confidence starting to crack. "Look, I'm trying here. I know I wasn't around, but I'm here now. That counts for something, doesn't it?" Jonah forced a polite smile. "Yeah, thanks for lunch." He barely touched his sandwich. Didn't ask for a ride. Said he had homework and left. Marcus watched him go, probably convinced he'd just fixed everything. Later that night, Greg was scrubbing a pan in his tiny kitchen when his phone buzzed. A text from Jonah. "Can I come by tomorrow?" Greg typed back instantly. Always. Anytime. The next morning, Jonah showed up in the same hoodie he'd worn to the cafe. He barely spoke. Just sat on the balcony at the small table, eyes fixed on the maze of power lines stretching across the sky. Met Marcus yesterday, he said after a long pause. Greg looked up. How was it? It was fine. He talks a lot. Greg snorted. Sounds about right. He doesn't really know me. Greg didn't say anything. He tried, I guess. Paid for lunch. Bragged about his car. Said all the things people say when they want you to think they care. Jonah hesitated. I asked him about Galileo. Greg grinned. You still have that cape? In the closet, Jonah said. And the cardboard telescope hat. Still smells like glue. They both laughed, softly but real. You never forgot the details, Jonah said. I was there, Greg answered. They didn't mention Denise, or the party, or Marcus with his sad, crumpled photo. Instead, they played chess on Greg's scuffed travel board. Jonah won a round. Greg took the next. The third was a draw. Before Jonah left, he wandered over to the bookshelf and pulled out an old box, full of science medals and faded Polaroids. Quietly, he slipped the adoption papers inside. Greg noticed. Nothing needed to be said. The following Saturday, Jonah returned, this time with a spiral notebook and a can of Red Bull. He didn't knock. Greg had left the door open on purpose. Jonah walked in like he belonged there, because in every way that mattered, he did. Crayon drawings from when Jonah was 9 still decorated the fridge. A lopsided rocket, stick figures labeled me and Dad, both grinning. Jonah sat cross-legged on the floor. I'm gonna do it. Greg glanced over. Do what? Give the speech at Mom's party. Greg turned off the stove. Only, I kind of want to make sure you're okay with it first. Greg perched on the arm of the couch. Kid, you don't need my permission. I know, but I'd still like it. Greg exhaled, not with doubt, but because the moment deserved a pause. You're old enough to decide the man you want to be, he said. Just make sure it's your choice. Jonah nodded quietly and opened his notebook. Want to hear it? Only if you want me to, Greg said. Jonah shook his head. Number, I think I need to finish it alone. Greg smiled. That's my boy. That night, Jonah came home without saying much. Denise was too wrapped up in comparing dresses, one for mingling, another for photos. Her planner was spread open across the counter. She didn't see that Jonah was different now. Quieter, more certain. In his room, Jonah stood before the mirror, reading from his pages. The first version sounded like a Hallmark card. I want to thank my family, past and present. I'm grateful for everyone who shaped me. He stopped. It felt hollow, like gripping a bouquet of thorns and pretending it didn't hurt. He tried again, sharper this time, angrier. Thanks to the man who showed me what love isn't, who dropped by when it suited him, who handed me a watch and called it heritage. Too bitter. He ripped the page out. He started over. This time he wrote what mattered. Greg sneaking into school to drop off a forgotten lunch, pretending to be a delivery guy just to make Jonah laugh. Greg building a cardboard Star Wars ship because store costumes were never good enough. Greg sitting through hours of Minecraft videos, nodding along like they were lectures just to be next to him. No names, no accusations, just the truth, just the man who had always stayed. By 2 a.m. it was done. He folded the speech carefully and slipped it into an old envelope Greg had once given him, an envelope that now held something entirely new. The next morning, Denise tapped on his door, coffee in one hand, a forced smile in the other. You've got your speech ready, right? Big moment. I told Marcus you'd say something about finally reconnecting with your real dad. He got a little emotional. Jonah didn't answer right away. It's finished. Her voice carried the kind of smile meant to end things, not invite them forward. Good boy. He closed the door quietly behind her and exhaled, slow and heavy. Not her good boy, not for a long time now. The venue could have been plucked from the glossy pages of an aspirational lifestyle spread and dropped at the city's edge. A soaring glass atrium glimmered under strings of warm golden bulbs. Ivy curled upward along blackened steel beams. Candles glowed faintly beneath fragile domes of blown glass. Every detail screamed intentional. Even the drinks bore names lifted from Denise's favorite phrases: flourish, a fresh start, true love. She was already sipping her second. Denise herself looked as if she were practicing for an encore wedding. Soft ivory dress, hair swept high in a perfectly casual knot. Guests orbited her like bees around a blooming queen. Every few minutes another toast rose in her honor, celebrations of resilience, rebirth, sheer joy. She dabbed at her eyes at precisely the right beats, pivoting toward the cameras with an effortless laugh, polished through repetition. She'd hired 2 photographers, one for formal portraits with significant people, another to capture candid moments destined, she insisted, to go viral. Marcus arrived when the lights had reached their peak shimmer. Navy jacket, a watch worth a small car, that practiced two-tone grin. He entered like someone who believed the night had been waiting on him. Denise greeted him with theatrical warmth. A kiss to the cheek, a pose for the cameras, greetings pitched loud enough for half the room to hear. "So glad you made it," she sang. "Wouldn't dream of missing it," Marcus replied, tucking his sunglasses into his pocket with a deliberate flair that begged applause. Photos followed. Marcus, Denise, Jonah's childhood friends, distant cousins, even Denise's former boss, who looked cornered but managed a strained smile. The jazz band eased into an upbeat rhythm. Champagne flutes chimed. The air thickened with perfume, lobster sliders, and an undertone of unspoken tension. Then Jonah stepped inside. No jacket, no tie, just a crisp shirt and a stillness that felt almost dangerous. The kind of calm that suggested he knew something no one else did. In his hand, a single folded sheet of paper. No phone, no gift, no date trailing in his wake. Denise saw him instantly. "There's my handsome boy," she called, arms opening wide. Jonah hugged her, polite, careful, detached, like touching a ghost who wore a familiar perfume. "You came," she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it," he answered, echoing Marcus's earlier words, though his tone was stripped of performance, just plain truth. She fussed with his collar. "You brought your speech?" He lifted the folded page. Her smile brightened. "Perfect. Stand under the arch. Light's better there." Jonah didn't answer, just nodded. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "Look at you, taller every time. Ready to let everyone know who your dad is?" A faint smile touched Jonah's face. "I think they're about to find out." His voice was mild, almost casual, so understated that Marcus missed the edge entirely. Denise missed it too, busy reapplying lip gloss in a silver compact. Across the greenhouse, chairs filled. Denise waved to the band, which softened into a low hum. The MC, a grad school friend with a borrowed laugh and a wireless mic, stepped forward. "Tonight we celebrate a truly remarkable woman," he began. "Before the music kicks up and we cut the cake, her incredible son has a few words to share. Let's hear it for Jonah." Polite applause, fixed smiles. Denise clasped her hands like a candidate's spouse awaiting adoration. Jonah moved beneath the floral arch. White light bathed him. He didn't speak right away. He unfolded the page, scanned it once, then looked up. The room seemed to tilt toward him. Something had shifted, though most couldn't name it yet. Greg was nowhere to be seen, or so it seemed. Jonah tapped the mic, soft pop. The music stilled. Glasses froze mid-lift. Phones angled upward. Denise, framed by a towering arrangement of lilies, beamed, certain she was about to be adored. Jonah's gaze drifted, from Denise to Marcus to the page in his hand. "They told me," he began, voice steady, honed to a point, "to stop calling someone dad." A low murmur stirred the crowd, heads tilted. Denise's smile wavered, barely. "They said I should use his real name, because technically he isn't my father." The words moved through the room like a slow tide. Denise sat straighter, fingers tightening around her wine glass. Jonah's eyes swept the guests. "At first, I didn't get it. Because names can lie. He paused, unfolding the page fully. The quiet rustle sounded deafening in the silence. "Tonight," he said, voice lifting, "I want to thank the man who read Goodnight Moon 8 nights in a row because I pretended I'd forgotten the ending." A few uneasy chuckles. "I want to thank the man who sat through my third-grade play and clapped like I'd won an award, though I tripped over the curtain and forgot half my lines." Heads turned. Someone whispered, "I want to thank the man who taught me to parallel park with 2 trash cans and a lawn chair, and didn't yell when I scraped his bumper." This time real laughter, warmer. The man who never missed a game, not once, even with a broken toe, standing for hours in freezing rain. The room leaned in. Some nodded slowly, hearts catching the meaning before minds could. Denise's color drained. She shifted, as if to rise, to interrupt, to control the narrative. Jonah looked at her, raising one hand. Not hostile, not cruel, final. She stayed seated, not because he forced her, but because the room already had. Jonah's voice steadied further. "The man I'm thanking tonight never told me who I had to be. He never gave me his name, but he gave me everything else. His patience, his time, his Saturdays, his entire heart." The silence thickened, charged, unbreakable. Marcus looked stricken, jaw tight. Jonah folded the page in half. "So," he said softly, "if you still want me to call him by his first name, I will." He turned toward the back of the room. "Thanks for coming, Greg." A gasp rippled through the crowd, and there he was, standing in the shadows. No spotlight, no suit, just Greg, quiet, unmoving, hands in his pockets. The man nobody had noticed, until now. Almost on instinct, the air in the room seemed to vanish. Jonah remained where he was, motionless at the microphone. He allowed the hush to grow dense, to curl around the guests like mist creeping in off the coast. His eyes scanned the crowd, catching faces mid-reaction. Smiles paused, discomfort blooming. Something had shifted, intangible but razor-edged, as though the oxygen had been drained from a vacuum-sealed space. Champagne flutes hovered in midair, uncertain. A waiter, tray in hand, stood locked in place as if frozen between seconds. The jazz musicians passed uncertain glances, but not one lifted their instrument. Jonah spoke again, his voice now louder, cutting through the heavy quiet and ricocheting off the glass walls of the atrium. "I was told," he said, "that he wasn't actually my father." He stared at Denise, not with rage, but with a sobering kind of precision. Then his attention shifted to Marcus. The polished smile that usually played on Marcus's lips had dissolved completely. "But biology doesn't define a father," Jonah continued. "Being there does." He took a few steps forward, lowering the crumpled paper he'd once clung to. "Thanks for last week's lunch, and the Rolex. Generous gestures," he said, voice steady. "But I didn't need a timepiece. I needed someone who remembered the teddy bear I couldn't sleep without when I was 7. Someone who sat beside me in the cafeteria when braces and awkwardness made me invisible." Marcus opened his mouth, perhaps to protest, to smooth it over, to fabricate. But no words came. Only the wet gleam of a tongue held captive behind gleaming teeth. Jonah turned to his mother. Denise sat stiff as stone, her fingers knotted tight in her lap. Joss, seated beside her, was as still as a person trying to remember how to appear normal. "Happy birthday, Mom," Jonah said flatly. No affection clung to the phrase. It sounded less like a celebration and more like a benediction for something already fading. "And next time you decide to tell someone about me," he let the sentence dangle sharp and raw, "make sure you remember who actually raised me." He stepped away from the mic. Still, no music stirred. The event host had melted into the background. The drummer held his sticks mid-air, unsure if the performance had ended or detonated. Someone dropped a wine glass. The clink of glass on concrete rang out like a punctuation mark, but no one acknowledged it. Denise turned sharply toward Marcus, silently pleading with him to recover the moment, to rescue them both. But Marcus said nothing. He stared at the floor, shoulders sagging under the realization that the script had long since slipped from his hands. Jonah didn't look back. He walked the aisle with quiet certainty, framed by white chairs and stunned expressions, as though leaving the aftermath of a fire he didn't start and had no intention of putting out. Outside, under strings of fairy lights woven through olive trees, Greg waited, half hidden by shadow. Jonah reached him. No exchange, no words. Jonah simply handed over the folded speech, creased, fingerprinted, its ink heavy with truths too long ignored. Greg took it, glanced at the bent paper, then lifted his eyes. And then Jonah smiled. Not for show, not out of forgiveness, just enough to be real. Back in the glass house, Denise rose shakily to her feet, lips parted as if to explain. But the mic was lifeless, the speakers mute, and no one was listening anymore. Jonah's footsteps whispered against the gravel as he left. Behind him, the venue glimmered with confusion and stunned silence. There was no music to smooth over the tension, no carefully selected playlist to restore order. Only the soft sounds of guests shifting, gathering their things. Chairs scraped, heels clacked toward the exit, voices lowered to whispers. Did that just happen? Jonah didn't turn around. Greg's car, a modest old Toyota parked beyond the circle of valets, sat quietly near the fence, engine already humming. He hadn't gotten out, just waited. Jonah opened the passenger door and slipped in. Neither man spoke. There was no need. Jonah pulled the original envelope from his coat, its edges worn, its presence weighty. He placed it gently on the dashboard, his fingers resting on it a moment longer than necessary. Greg's gaze followed it, then flicked to the road ahead. Inside, behind the tall panes of glass, Denise stood alone, arms crossed like she might collapse if she unfolded. She didn't call after her son, didn't try to follow, didn't even mouth his name. She just stood there, composing a new version of the story, one that no one in the room believed anymore. Marcus had already retreated to the other end of the room, loosening his collar, searching for an exit. A guest gave him a half-hearted pat on the back. He twitched at the touch, then drifted toward the bar. No one tried to stop him. Outside, the string lights trembled in a soft breeze. Flower petals danced across the ground like things left unsaid. A lone photographer in the shadows quietly began deleting images, one at a time. No one told him to stay. The musicians were packing up. There would be no encore. Jonah leaned his head against the window. He wasn't drained or angry, just done. Greg pulled away from the curb, smooth and silent. No fanfare, no words, only the gentle forward motion that comes when everything important has already been said. The radio stayed quiet. Greg didn't reach for it. Jonah cracked the window. Cool air brushed in, clean and undeniable. Greg glanced over. Jonah met his eyes. "You hungry?" Greg asked. Jonah gave a small nod. "Yeah." Greg turned onto the open road. The venue faded behind them, its lights still glowing, though they'd lost all meaning. And somewhere between the party left behind and the quiet roadside diner they'd never discussed but always returned to, the weight began to lift. Not entirely, but enough to breathe.